Thandai's hands were trembling as she held the shiny new house keys. For months, she had skipped lunches, taken extra night shifts, and saved every coin she could from her job as a nurse in Nairobi. All of it for one reason: to give her mother, Lindai, the one thing she had always dreamed of, a home of her own. That evening, the family gathered in their small apartment to celebrate Lindai's 60th birthday. The air was filled with laughter, the smell of roasted chicken, and the sound of old songs playing softly in the background. Thandai could barely focus on the food. Her heart was racing with excitement. When it was time for gifts, she stood up and handed her mother a small box wrapped in gold paper. "Open it, Mama," she said, her voice shaking just a little. Lindai smiled and slowly untied the ribbon. Inside was a single house key on a silver ring. For a moment, she just stared at it, confused. Then her eyes widened. "Thandai, was this?" Thandai nodded, tears welling up. "Yes, Mama. Your house. In your name. Paid in full." The room went silent before bursting into cheers and clapping. Lindai covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She stood and hugged her daughter tightly, whispering, "You've given me more than I ever dreamed." Everyone joined in the celebration. Everyone except her brother, Sibusiso. He sat quietly at the corner of the table, his smile tight, his eyes unreadable. Thandai noticed but tried to ignore it. Tonight wasn't about him, she told herself. It was about her mother, about love, and about finally giving back to the woman who had given her everything. The dinner table buzzed with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the smell of roasted meat and chapati filling the room. Everyone seemed happy, their faces glowing in the warm light. But Thandai could feel something heavy sitting in the air. It wasn't the food or the wine. It was Sibusiso. Her brother sat quietly at the end of the table, barely touching his plate, his eyes darting between her and their mother. Thandai tried to ignore it. She laughed at her aunt's jokes, helped her mother serve more food, and even teased her cousins. She wanted the evening to stay perfect, to keep that joy she had imagined when she planned this surprise. But deep down, she could feel his silence pressing against her like a storm waiting to break. Sibusiso had always been Mama's favorite. Growing up, he got the first serving, the extra attention, the soft words when he messed up. Thandai never minded. It was just the way things were. But lately, she'd seen the change in him. The small comments, the cold looks, the distance that had grown since she'd started doing well at work. When the cake was brought out, everyone clapped and sang loudly. Lindai smiled, her eyes still red from crying earlier when Thandai gave her the house keys. For a few minutes, it felt perfect again. Thandai leaned back in her chair, feeling proud, watching her mother blow out the candles. Then, as plates were passed around, Sibusiso spoke under his breath, loud enough for only a few people to hear. "So you're trying to buy her love now?" The room froze. The laughter stopped. The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Thandai blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "What did you say?" she asked softly. He shrugged, looking at her with a half-smile that wasn't really a smile. "You think giving her a house will fix everything? You think you're the hero now?" A few relatives looked down at their plates, pretending not to hear. Lindai didn't say anything. She didn't defend Thandai. She just lowered her eyes, picking at her cake like she wanted to disappear. Thandai's heart sank. The room that had been filled with warmth now felt cold and strained. Her throat tightened, but she forced a smile. "It's not about that, Sibusiso. I just wanted to do something nice for Mama." He let out a small laugh, bitter and sharp. "Of course you did." No one spoke after that. The music kept playing, but the mood had changed completely. Even her mother's earlier joy seemed to fade, replaced by something unreadable, guilt, maybe, or discomfort. Thandai looked around the table at her family, the people she loved most, and felt a pang of regret. Maybe she shouldn't have made such a big deal of the gift. Maybe she'd pushed too far without realizing how it would make others feel. Still, she swallowed the hurt and lifted her glass. "To Mama," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "To her happiness." Everyone murmured in agreement, raising their glasses. But Sibusiso didn't move. He just stared at her, that same unreadable look on his face. Thandai forced another smile, pretending everything was fine. But deep inside, she felt the first crack forming, the tiny fracture in what she had hoped would be the perfect night. When it was time for speeches, the room grew quiet. Plates were pushed aside, glasses refilled, and all eyes turned to Lindai as she slowly stood up. Her face was glowing in the soft light, a proud smile playing on her lips. Thandai felt a rush of emotion. This was the moment she had been waiting for, her mother's words of pride and love. "I want to say something," Lindai began, her voice calm and steady. "Thandai, my daughter, I see how hard you've worked. You've carried yourself with strength and grace. You've made me proud." Thandai's heart swelled. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every extra shift had been worth it just to hear those words. Her eyes filled with tears as her mother continued speaking. She felt seen. She felt loved. But then Lindai paused, glancing around the table. The tone in her voice shifted slightly, soft, but edged with something heavier. But a house, she said slowly, can't replace what family means. A small murmur rippled through the room. Thandiv's smile faltered. Her mother went on. Sometimes, she said, looking straight at Thandive now, generosity is just another way to prove you're better than others. The words hit like a slap. The laughter and chatter that had filled the room earlier vanished. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the silence that followed. Thandive froze. For a second, she thought she'd misheard. But no, her mother's expression was serious, even sad, as if she truly believed what she was saying. I didn't, Thandive started, her voice barely above a whisper, but she stopped. She couldn't speak. Her chest tightened, her hands trembled under the table. Her relatives avoided her eyes. Her cousin Lorado took a sip of her drink, pretending to be busy. Her aunt shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The joy and excitement that had filled the room just minutes ago had completely drained away. Sibusiso sat back, smirking slightly, his expression saying what he didn't dare voice out loud. I told you so. Lindive sat down again, acting as though nothing had happened. She smiled politely and said, All right, who's next? As if she hadn't just torn open her daughter's heart in front of everyone. Thandive sat there, forcing herself to breathe. Her throat burned, her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. She took a small sip of water, hoping it would steady her, but the lump in her throat wouldn't go away. All she had wanted was to show her mother love, to give her something meaningful after years of struggle. She had imagined laughter, hugs, maybe even tears of joy. Instead, her mother's words had turned her gift into something ugly, something she never meant it to be. As the room slowly came back to life with small, awkward conversations, Thandive sat still, her mind spinning. The house key she had given with so much love now felt heavy, almost like a burden. She smiled weakly at her mother, pretending everything was fine, but deep down, something inside her cracked. The night that was supposed to bring them closer had suddenly pushed them miles apart. For a long moment after her mother's words, no one spoke. The silence was so thick that even the clinking of a fork sounded loud. Then came the whispers. Her aunt leaned over to say something to her husband. Her cousin Lorado covered her mouth, trying to hide a nervous giggle. Someone coughed. Another shifted in their seat. The warmth that had filled the room earlier had completely vanished. Thandive sat frozen, her cheeks burning. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, each glance a quiet judgment. Her mother stared down at her plate as if nothing had happened, while Sibusiso leaned back in his chair with that familiar smug grin. Mama said it perfectly, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words stung more than she expected. Thandive wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to run somewhere, anywhere, away from those faces that now looked at her like she had done something wrong. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to smile politely. Excuse me, she said softly, pushing her chair back. No one stopped her. No one even called after her. She slipped outside, closing the door behind her. The night air hit her face, cool and sharp. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her breathing. The stars above sparkled faintly, distant and quiet, like they were watching her too. She walked a few steps into the small yard, her heels sinking into the grass. The sounds of laughter drifted faintly from inside the house, and each one felt like a knife. She had imagined this night so differently. In her mind, her mother would have been glowing with happiness, the whole family proud. Instead, she'd been made to look like she was showing off, like her love was just a performance. Why, Mama? She whispered into the dark. After everything I've done? Her throat tightened as she thought about all the nights she'd worked double shifts, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the endless saving. She hadn't done it for recognition. She just wanted her mother to have a home, a place where she could finally rest. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her back to the moment. She looked down. It was a message from her bank. Transaction alert. First house payment has been cleared. Thandive stared at the message for a long time, her vision blurring with tears. A bitter smile crept onto her face. At least, she thought, it's really hers. She slipped the phone back into her purse and wiped her cheeks. The party noises inside continued. Faint laughter, the sound of music, the clatter of dishes, but she couldn't bring herself to go back in. She stood there under the stars for a long while, feeling both proud and broken. Proud that she had kept her promise to her mother. Broken because somehow, that love had been turned into something to be ashamed of. As the wind brushed against her face, Thandive took a deep breath and whispered to herself, it's okay. One day she'll understand. But deep down, she wasn't sure if she truly believed it. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between Thandive and her mother stretched longer than she expected. No calls, no messages, just quiet. At first, Thandive told herself her mother was busy, but deep down she knew it wasn't that. Something had changed that night, and the space between them had grown wider with each passing day. She tried to focus on work at the clinic, patients, paperwork, the endless ringing of the phone. But every time she took a break, she found herself staring at her phone, waiting for a call that never came. Even her brother, Sibusiso, hadn't reached out. It felt as if her whole family had quietly turned away, leaving her to sit in the echo of that birthday dinner. Then one afternoon, while she was finishing her rounds, the receptionist came to her office door. "Thandai," she said softly, "your mother is here." Thandai froze. Her pen slipped from her hand. For a second, she wasn't sure if she wanted to see her. But before she could decide, her mother appeared at the door, dressed neatly as always, her hands folded in front of her. She looked smaller somehow, older, like the weight of something heavy sat on her shoulders. "Hi, Mama," Thandai said carefully, standing up. Lindau gave a faint smile, but didn't return the greeting. She looked around the small clinic, her eyes resting on the framed certificates and photos on the wall. "You've done well for yourself," she said quietly. "Thank you," Thandai replied. There was a long pause. Finally, Lindau spoke again. "You didn't have to buy me a house." Her tone was calm, almost gentle. "You should be saving for yourself, for your future." "I didn't ask for that." Thandai took a breath, trying to stay composed. "I know you didn't ask, Mama. I wanted to do something good for you. You've worked so hard your whole life. You deserved it." Her mother shook her head. "You think it's good, but you don't see how it looks. You embarrassed your brother." Thandai blinked, stunned. "Embarrassed him? How?" Lindau sighed and looked down at her hand. "He feels small next to you now, like he's done nothing with his life. You should have thought about that before making such a big show." Thandai's heart sank. She stared at her mother, disbelief washing over her. "So my kindness is the problem?" she asked quietly. Her mother didn't answer. She just pressed her lips together, glanced toward the door, and said, "You're still young. One day you'll understand." Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. Thandai stood there for a long moment, frozen, her chest tight. She wanted to run after her, to ask why love had to feel so complicated. But she couldn't move. She just sank into her chair, staring at the empty doorway where her mother had stood. All she had wanted was to make her happy. Instead, it felt like she had broken something that couldn't be fixed. The clinic around her buzzed with noise, phones ringing, people talking, but inside her, there was only silence. A few days after her mother's visit, Thandai's phone rang. She saw Sibusiso's name flash across the screen and hesitated before answering. "You think buying her a house makes you better than us?" His voice was sharp, almost accusing. "You're selfish, Thandai, always trying to show off." Thandai felt her stomach drop. "Sibusiso, I didn't do it to show off," she said, keeping her voice calm even though it shook inside. "I just wanted Mama to have something she's always dreamed of." He scoffed. "Right. You always have to be the hero. But don't think you're better than everyone else just because you can afford to throw money around." She ended the call before she said something she might regret, her hands trembling. She sank into her chair, trying to make sense of his words. She had imagined happiness, gratitude, maybe even pride. Instead, there was anger and resentment aimed at her. A week later, more pain arrived in a different form. Thandai overheard a conversation in the kitchen when her aunt came to visit. Her voice was low, carrying that sharp tinge of gossip. "Did you hear what your mother told everyone about Thandai's gift?" her aunt whispered to another relative. "She says it was just for show, like she's flaunting her money. That girl thinks she's so perfect." Thandai felt as if someone had slammed a door on her chest. She backed away quietly, leaning against the counter, listening to the words sink deep into her heart. The woman she had loved most, her mother, was telling the family that her act of love wasn't real, that it was selfish and prideful. Her chest ached. She could feel tears welling up, hot and uncontrollable. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering every sacrifice, every extra hour she'd worked, every coin she had saved. And now it was all twisted into something ugly in the eyes of the people she cared about. She cried. She cried for hours, until the pillow was damp and her shoulders ached. She cried for the injustice, for the misunderstanding, for the loneliness of being judged for something she had done purely out of love. But then, after the tears came a strange calm. Something inside her shifted. She realized that no matter what anyone said or thought, her gift had been genuine. Her love had been real. She had done the right thing, even if others couldn't see it yet. By morning, the sadness was still there, but it carried a spark of determination. Thandai wiped her face, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "I'll show them who I really am, not with words, but with action." That night marked a turning point. The hurt was still raw, but for the first time, Thandai felt a quiet strength settle inside her. She knew she couldn't control what others thought, not even her mother. But she could control what she did next, and she intended to do something that no one could twist or misunderstand. Thandai decided she had said enough. There was nothing left to explain, no words that could undo what had been twisted into criticism and gossip. Instead, she turned her energy toward what she loved most, helping people. She poured herself into her work at the clinic, treating every patient with the care and attention she had always dreamed of giving. Months later, she took a bigger step. Using her savings and a small loan, she opened a modest health center in Kibera. It wasn't fancy, but it had what mattered: clean rooms, medicine, and a team of nurses who shared her passion. The focus was on mothers who couldn't afford proper care, women who often went without checkups, who gave birth without support, who quietly suffered because they had no one to help. Thandai made sure they had someone. Word began to spread. The local community started talking about the nurse who had given her mother a house and was now giving her time, her skills, and her heart to the people who needed it most. Donations trickled in at first, bags of supplies, boxes of baby clothes, but soon, bigger contributions arrived. A local NGO offered funding, and a journalist from a neighborhood paper came to cover the story. The headline read, "Nurse who gave her mother a house now healing her community." Thandai saw her face in the paper and felt a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about recognition, not really. It was proof that she could make a difference, that her actions carried meaning beyond what anyone else thought. She finally felt like the work she had done, both for her mother and now for her community, was making a real impact. And yet, despite all the messages of gratitude, the congratulations, and the support, one silence remained. Her phone never rang from her mother. No calls, no texts, no sign that Lindau had thought about her in all these months. At first, it stung, a hollow ache that sat in her chest like a shadow. But slowly, Thandai realized that her mother's silence could not define her. She had chosen to move forward, to create something meaningful, and that was hers to hold on to. With every patient she treated, every mother she helped, Thandai felt a sense of purpose that was deeper than pride or approval. She had stopped chasing validation from those who misunderstood her. Now, her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. And still, as she looked at her phone late at night, she sometimes wondered if her mother would ever see the life Thandai had built, not as a show of wealth, but as a testament to love and care. She didn't know when or if that call would come. But for the first time in a long time, she realized she didn't need it to keep moving forward. Thandai had shifted. She was no longer waiting for understanding or acceptance. She was creating a legacy, one small life at a time, and letting the world see the real measure of her heart. One quiet morning, Thandai's phone rang. She almost didn't recognize the number, but when she answered, a familiar voice spoke urgently. It was her mother's neighbor. "Thandai, your mom isn't well. She's been alone for days," the neighbor said, worry thick in her voice. Thandai felt a shock run through her chest. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her bag, her keys, and ran toward her mother's new house, her heart pounding. The streets of Nairobi blurred past as she weaved through traffic, adrenaline carrying her faster than she had moved in months. When she arrived, the house felt too quiet. She opened the door to find Lindau sitting at the kitchen table, her shoulders slumped, her hands folded in front of her. Her mother looked frail, smaller than Thandai remembered, and her eyes were red from crying. "Mama?" Thandai called softly, rushing to her side. Her mother lifted her head, and for the first time in weeks, she looked directly at her daughter. "Thandai," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I'm sorry." Thandai sank into the chair beside her and took her mother's hands in hers. They were thin and trembling, but familiar. "Mama, what happened?" she asked gently. Lindau's lips trembled as she tried to form words. "That night at dinner. I was scared," she admitted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Scared because you succeeded where I failed. I felt small. I didn't know how to handle it, and I said things I shouldn't have. But you didn't deserve my words." Thandai's own tears fell freely now. She pressed her forehead against her mother's. "Mama, I only wanted you to have peace," she whispered, her voice catching. "I wanted to give you something you could call your own, a place where you could feel safe and loved. That's all I wanted." Her mother's hands clutched hers tighter. "I see that now," she said softly, voice breaking. "I let my pride get in the way. I let fear twist my words into something cruel. I was wrong, Thandai. You were only trying to show love, and She choked back a sob, unable to finish. Thandai held her mother for a long time, rocking her gently, letting the tears flow freely between them. For the first time in weeks, the walls between them began to crumble. Words that had once hurt now became the bridge they needed to reconnect. Outside, the morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over them. Thandai realized something in that moment. Love wasn't always about gifts or grand gestures. Sometimes it was about showing up, being present, and forgiving even when it took time to understand. And in that quiet kitchen, mother and daughter sat together, letting the past fall away, their hearts slowly finding each other again. Thandai didn't leave her mother's side for days. She stayed at the house, helping with meals, tidying up, and just being there. Slowly, the tension that had built up over months began to melt. They cooked together in the small kitchen, the smell of sautéed onions and garlic filling the air, and laughed over small mistakes, like when Lindive dropped a spoonful of stew onto the floor, or when Thandive spilled flour on the counter. They talked too, at first about little things, the neighbors, the garden, the news, but soon the conversations became deeper, more honest. Thandive listened as her mother shared memories from her youth, stories she had never told anyone, and Lindive listened as Thandive spoke about her work, her dreams, and the worries she carried for others. The walls that had once felt so heavy between them began to dissolve. One quiet afternoon, as they sat drinking tea at the kitchen table, Lindive reached across and touched Thandive's hand. Her smile was faint but real, soft and full of something Thandive hadn't seen in a long time: openness. "You know," Lindive said slowly, "when you gave me that house key, I saw myself through you. Strong, capable, kind, everything I wanted to be and never quite managed." She paused, her fingers squeezing Thandive's. "I just didn't know how to handle it. I felt small, scared that I'd been left behind by the daughter I raised alone." Thandive's chest ached with understanding. For the first time, everything clicked. Her mother's harsh words, her silence, the coldness, they hadn't been cruelty. They had been fear. Fear of losing the one person she loved most. Fear that her daughter's success would somehow erase the bond they shared. Tears welled in Thandive's eyes, but they were tears of relief this time, not pain. "Mama," she whispered, "I've never wanted to leave you behind. I just wanted to give you something that made your life easier, happier." Lindive nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I know that now," she said softly, "and I've been so proud of you all along, even when I couldn't say it right." The rest of the day passed in quiet warmth. They tended the small garden outside, laughing when the wind blew dirt onto their clothes. They shared stories from their past, jokes that only they understood, and even made plans for the future, small dreams they could chase together. For the first time in a long time, Thandive felt peace. The anger, the hurt, the misunderstandings, they didn't vanish completely, but they no longer held power over her heart. Her mother's pride wasn't a weapon. It had been a shield, protecting a heart that loved fiercely but feared deeply. And in that simple, sunlit kitchen, surrounded by the smell of tea and fresh bread, Thandive realized something profound. Love could heal, even when it had been buried under months of silence and misunderstanding. The bond between them was stronger now, not because of the house, but because of the truth they had finally shared. It was in those quiet moments, in laughter and conversation, that Thandive understood her mother fully. And perhaps for the first time, her mother truly understood her. Months later, Thandive hosted another dinner, this time at her mother's new house. The place was warm and full of light, the smell of food drifting through every room. Friends and family gathered around the table, laughter and chatter filling the space in a way that felt easy and natural. When everyone was settled, Lindive raised her glass. "A house is just walls," she said, her voice gentle but sure. "But the love inside it, that's what makes it home." The room erupted in cheers. Even Sibusiso, who had been quiet for so long, offered a small, awkward smile. "Guess I was wrong about you, sis," he muttered under his breath, making Thandive chuckle. "You can make it up to me by doing the dishes," she teased, nudging him with her elbow. Her mother laughed, a sound that filled the room with warmth and relief. The atmosphere was light, full of love, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the family was truly together again. Thandive looked around at the faces of the people she loved, at the warmth in her mother's eyes, at Sibusiso's reluctant smile, and felt something settle deep in her chest. It wasn't the house that mattered. It was the forgiveness, the understanding, the moments they shared that made this place a real home. She thought back to that night when her mother's words had cut her so deeply. The anger, the silence, the heartbreak, they had all taught her something important. Those words, once painful, had pushed her to grow, to create, to understand love in its truest form. That night, surrounded by laughter and conversation, Thandive realized that gifts could be given, but forgiveness and love, those were what built the strongest home. And for the first time in a long while, she felt taller, stronger, and at peace. The past was no longer a weight on her shoulders. It was the reason she could stand proud, surrounded by family, and finally, truly feel at home.